All right, so graduation. Graduation was a real aspirational goal. Actually, it was something that USAID expected in their call for proposals, the RFP. It's also what we had kind of stated ourselves. We're going to be kind of a top line goal level, if you will, measurement of success. We had that two ways: government-led graduation and self-graduation. Well, not looking to the past on why there has been low graduation rates. I think there's been lots of literature. I think there's been reasons for households. I think those are lots of good reasons. What I have listed here, though, is why we may see limitations in the future to graduate in the next year. I'm going to say really until around Q3. And we know, or I anticipate, that there are several reasons. One is there could be a low to limited interest in graduating PSMP households with the current PSMP closing and the new PSMP starting. We've been told the government has deferred beneficiary selection until maybe early next year, January, February 2021. We also know that there's been significant government turnover, is what I'm hearing, as part of the aftermath of the communal violence. We had seen this also under previous states of emergency where government officials were held accountable for either not managing the political situation in their areas, whether it's Wada or Kabali level, or in this case here, unfortunately, may have been seen as party to that conflict. So it's really hard to do graduation at this time where there could be staff turnover. And this would be kind of a request that I kind of put out there. I'm sorry if we have, I sent out some queries last night. I have not followed up. The other one is the government has already completed their planning for this year. So we need to know, what did they say? So if we want to have an 80% target, but they've committed in their own work plans to only commit 5%, there's going to be a big disconnect there. And we also know that self-graduation is going to be complicated for households this year, at the household level, at the environment level. So I definitely, and I should highlight this, really, I want us to, I'm going to actually put a quick short in there. Yeah. So we want to continue existing graduation activities. So right now, and thank you, Sion, and for the team, I think really you guys have been really working hard on this. I think we continue wanting to kind of support on graduation through providing trainings to officials. Yeah. And also, we also want to provide trainings, what was it, aspiration, graduate trainings for houses. The only issue with these two, and we want to focus on, is we are talking about right now a graduation rate, last I saw, between 1 to 3%, and the expectation is 80% of households would graduate. So these are really good activities we should focus on, but these two activities will probably, within the current time, the current political situation and where the country is in terms of managing crises, whether communal violence or COVID-19, is going to be very hard for us to go from 3% to 80% really in the next few months. And that's why I'm suggesting we may want to define graduation a little bit different. My change of scope is to say, all right, what can we do that would allow us to show progress towards graduation? Yeah. So one thing is we need to do it in such a way that we manage the variables. Graduation really, as it's been defined now, is not a very empowering space concept for a project management. For government-led graduations that's dictated by the government, by self-graduation that's dictated by the households. In the event that those two do not perform, the project will be seen as not fulfilling its mandate. So I think we want to redefine graduation so we're managing the variables that are under our control or mandate. We also want to be able to do it in a way that would allow us to control, to basically measure progress, regularly. At this point, I believe that we're really only kind of checking in on graduation numbers on an annual basis. We may check other times, but in general, we won't have that luxury. This is also a time where we may want to adjust, quote, the graduation target. And how do we want to do that without drastically changing it? Right now the target is around 18,300 households. We can't just reduce that to 700 or 4,000. We want to figure out how to do that. So the point is, how would we redefine graduation to allow us to manage the variables under our control? How do we want to do it in a way that would allow us to measure? And how would it also give us a chance to adjust our targets? My suggestion then is to consider a graduation ready concept. And we had talked a little about this earlier on. We were then trying to redefine graduation. We were trying to look at resiliency. Maybe one reason we want to come back. So right now, we would want to measure it by household. All right? This becomes quite important. So it could be, we're going to give examples, number of households who have accessed a loan from a financial service provider, not just number of people who've accessed a loan from a household, from a financial service provider. And I think that's one of the things that we began understanding as we've done a lot of this household data cleaning. All right. And the other one is to choose a criteria. This has probably been the hardest thing about graduation. Nobody can agree on graduation. What does graduation mean? How should the target be set? Is it going to be based on household assets? We don't know. And even looking at this conversation of what is graduation is something that continues to even plague or be problematic for the future for the design of the current PIM, to the point where you're not seeing graduation being mentioned very much. And so this is not a time for us to redefine what is graduation and things like this. Redefine in the sense of saying, well, what is the criteria for graduation? Again, we don't have that within our mandate. What do we have? Well, what we do have is to ensure that households have completed key livelihood activities as defined in the PSMP project implementation manual. If you go back and you look at section 9-3 of the PIM, you'll also see that they have like a DA checklist for a livelihood checklist. Now, we're not going to be using livelihood checklists, and I'll talk to you about why. Well, let me tell you why, primarily. Is the livelihood checklist to be counted requires government signatures. In the event a government is not signed or has not signed for a particular milestone, we can't say number of people have completed livelihood checklist. We get held up by a very problematic documentation and signatory issue. Again, we don't control that. But if we defined it as number of households that have completed the activities that are essential to PSMP PIM as described in a livelihood checklist, that we have control over. And just as a reminder, that really comes down to about 8 items. Did a household complete training literacy? Have they saved internally? Have they completed technical training? Have they received business marketing trainings? Have they completed a business plan? Have they been referred to a financial service provider? Have they accessed external financing? And have they received follow-up? So that's kind of the direction I'm suggesting. is let's make sure that as many of our households, ideally 18,000 households, have completed all of these activities, and we're going to talk about later on, referred to an FSP. So in all these are all ones that are already clearly in our mandate. These are ones that we have been doing. So we would say if a household has completed these activities, we would say they are, quote, graduation ready. And then we move forward. So I'm going to put this on pause here. I'm going to take a couple questions here. I do know we come from the after action review. But I want to take a few questions here, lightly touch on the access to finance. We do have a conversation in a couple hours time or about an hour's time with that team just to float some ideas past you. Again, questions or comments around this, because this is kind of a fundamental change to how are we going to define it, but I think is a lot more empowering to the project. So let me, actually for this one here, I will continue the recording. I think that we may find this of interest. All right, so let me take a look. If you have any questions or comments, let's include those. Any questions or comments that people may have about this concept of graduation and changing the language? Sion, I see, is there something you'd like to add to that? I know you've been working with the team a lot. Okay. Good morning, Tecliana. So what I would say is we have two options. We retain the same definition and already the project would be seen as a failure. Or we say we would like to change the definition and then move forward from this. And we can do that because part of our annual work plan is to change the meal plan. So what I want to do is say, I think you've asked a really good question. I would say, how can we sell this to USAID? I think the first question we want to ask ourselves is this, what do we want to do? Will this help us address their concerns? And do we think this is a solution for us? And then we go back and we present it to them. So I would say there's so much crisis unfolding. I would say that this is probably USAID may be open, and this may be a conversation we have with Retta and his supervisor as we move forward. So yes, that's the idea, is that we need to, I think, let's put it this way. I would like the conversation to be is, do we think these are the right changes to make? And then there's the political dimension, which is how do we think it can be best sold to USAID? I see Segai, for instance, is a great point. Currently the government is scheduled to graduate, is currently scheduled to only graduate 596 households. That we're going to be very far away from the 18,000. So instead of simply saying, well, we don't have control of that, the question is, how do we change it so we can show progress in empowering ourselves? Sion, is there anything you'd like to add to that before we jump onto access to finance? Yeah. Perfect. Very good. So I think what we can do is we'll have a separate conversation around this, and I think it's great. I think what we need to develop is a graduation strategy, something which maybe I'll take a look what you've done. Uh, that's one of my goals, but I just want to introduce because what this does mean, and this is where we'll come back to our M&E people shortly. We have about just a few minutes to talk about access to finance, so I want to touch on that and come back. But what this does mean is that we will now need to know how many households have completed, say, business market skills trainings in which WRADAs, and then focus on those households that have not received that particular training. So it's not going to be just setting graduation targets. I think by putting a checklist, it's going to allow each sector lead to say, what are we going to focus on? And then, of course, Testify, as you remarked, there is going to be, I don't want us to change the livelihood checklist. I think what we need to do is take a look, such as around participation. I think that's a really good idea. So again, this may be kind of on the balance. If we have limited time engagement with the partners, how much, or with the community, how do we do gender messaging within, say, a household budget development? In terms of follow-up, we don't know about that. There's no clear guidelines on that. So we have to think about what does that mean. But that's a general framework. All right, I'm going to finish. I'm sorry to cut this short. We have only a few minutes. We've got another meeting, but I want to just introduce something that was also out there in a presentation and that we're going to have more conversations with as we move forward. So I'm going to walk through this kind of quickly. Access to finance is the next one. Now, it's going to use the easiest way. You have this presentation, so I'm going to just try to get to the point of what are we going to suggest. So we now know that for USAID and especially for RedTech, graduation and access to loans are really important. Access to external loans specifically is seen as a way to measure whether households are going to graduate or not. The assumption is households don't get external finance, households do not graduate. We can debate that, but that is a framework that is in a mindset we're trying to manage. Right now, we've kind of been relatively low in those achievements if we were to look at it in that way. So how do we define it to access to external finance and maybe consider either redefining that or expanding our menus? When we first started, we only defined it as number of loans taken from LRO supported FSPs. Sorry about that. That was my issue, it looks like. So we have a history now of redefining that. So now we're saying, well, external finance can include that. It can include from non-FSPs, such as Oxico. So now we actually try to record and measure if people are getting loans from say from Oxico, that we can show that as access to external finance. We've also included if households receive a PSNP livelihood transfer. So access to external finance was very limitedly defined and has already shown that we've made some changes. This will be a bigger conversation, another separate thing, but we did have a conversation to be had with the team. But I was thinking we did have several kind of theories of change around it. So we assumed if people can participate in lending, internally it increases the culture of borrowing. We have some behavior changes we've done through household debt management. We're trying to have people have profitable businesses. We also have trying to link FSPs. And at the FSP level, the way we've really been doing that is by providing loan guarantee funds and capacity building. I would challenge, though, in some ways, that household debt is one factor, and I agree with Fatia. We still can't say what the full scope is. What we do know is that it is a limiting factor. So one is there has been a practice in the past where in times of crisis, households have been provided soft loans that they are still expected to pay off. So one way we avoided doing that this year was actually we gave cash transfers. So one idea is to prevent households to move further into household debt by providing them unsustainable lifelines, such as a soft loan, which actually is going to create a credit history of maybe of inability to pay. And then the other one that I'm throwing out, which is a very radical idea, which is households are facing debt, existing debt. We're trying to address that. But the problem is, even if a household, participates in lending, they have a good business, even when we link them, if they have existing debt, they just can't get future debt. There's several things I've come back to the United States and I've been looking to. One is there's not good, let me this way, there's not very forgiving bankruptcy laws within Ethiopia. So it's very hard that if somebody's made a mistake or an error that they can assume and get back onto their feet. In Ethiopia, I believe it's around 10 years before the debt can be written off. Yeah. The other one is that in other regions, they have seen in Amara and Tigray a debt forgiveness. We have not been able to see the Oromo government moving that forward. And we also see that the question now of household debt management is still not being taken as a issue for PSNP for the future of PSNP. So what that means is that the assumption still is we have to give more money to groups like Oxaco to get more loans out, but there's not the question of eligibility because of past loans. So the two things I would be considering, let people know, and then we'll finish up here. One is, do we now want to expand this definition, an evolving definition to include not only PSNP livelihood transfers, but COVID-19 cash transfers? So in other words, that is a financial, people were receiving money, and we heard many of them already viewing it as capital for business. And then the real drastic idea, and I don't know where to go with this, is do we help pay off the debt of households? That's very, we've been dealing with now for this household debt for many years. If we go into the next round of PSNP 5, next PSN, where if existing debt continues to be an issue, that's going to be a hard thing. So do we want to look at, quote, a way of partially buying back debt? So let me just give out some ideas. This is going to require more technical conversation. Could it be that if they pay, let's say they have a 2,000 birr debt, outstanding historical debt, and they say, I can pay 1,000 birr at the end of this crop. Okay. Would we say if you pay for every dollar, if you will, it's like a matching. For every debt that you pay off a historical debt, we would match it. So if you pay off 100 birr, we'll pay off 100 birr. So it's not that we're going to pay it in full, but there is a question of if they identified historical debt as a major issue for them, we would help them try to rebuild their credit history. They may not be eligible immediately for future loans. They may be able to get future loans maybe next agricultural season or in the course of this time, but the idea is to allow them to access those. And there's another way we could do it. We could structure in a way that says, look, we will pay off the interest. So you still need to pay the principal, but we could do this. I don't know how we would frame this, but again, coming out of the United States in this period of time, it's been really interesting to see the different number of financial solutions that people are looking at. And I'm going to just throw this one out. So do we consider utilizing our loan guarantee fund, which is underspent and it's a lot of money, to also help us get people to be eligible for future loans by considering any household subsidies. We haven't had a chance to do this, which is really getting your feedback on this. But what I would like us to do is at this point to let people know these are the ones we're considering. We have a meeting on the after action review here now. I have another meeting with external finance, the access to finance team to look at their strategy. So I'm going to be providing another way I will be taking some of these ideas, maybe consolidating them and putting out for circulation as we move forward. So I want to thank everybody. As I said, I'm going to be back in mid-September. Our goal is for October 31st to get this in. So I'm trying to figure out what are the strategic things that we really need to focus on. I think by us agreeing in principle to the two things I've addressed are going to fundamentally change our LOP target parameters. And therefore, I think will help us as we look at our DIP and as we look at our target setting. So again, thank you, everyone. I'm sorry I'm going to step out, but I think we have Jennifer waiting for us. I am also looking at scheduling a couple other of these meetings this week, and I will be providing more detail as my day is starting. I'm going to start sitting down and look at what you've written and start providing more guidance. So again, thank you very much, everyone. Over.